The NLCS begins tonight, 8:15 prime time. Who is going to come out on top? Mets versus Dodgers. I'll give you your full series preview on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Well, we have arrived at the League Championship Series round. There are 4 teams left in Major League Baseball. You got Yankees Guardians on one side, and of course, Mets Dodgers set to begin a 7-game series tonight. How could you not be fired up for this? This is going to be a lot of fun. Throughout the show today, we'll be talking about this series from all angles. I want to talk about the narratives, but we're going to end this show there because there is the Shohei Ohtani versus Francisco Lindor narrative. There's just Ohtani in his own entity as the narrative. There's the playoff history between these teams, and also what we talked about on yesterday's show, how this is a full circle moment for the Mets to face the Dodgers. Spent a whole show on it, going back in time to the end of May when the Mets hit rock bottom facing the Dodgers. The infamous Jorge Lopez game that necessitated the players-only meeting that completely changed the Mets season. So if you're curious about that really interesting narrative, again, I spent a whole show on it yesterday. I think that is a really interesting, just sort of background story of the Mets season and how facing the Dodgers in this collision course is very fitting. But let's talk about the games. Let's talk about your preview of what's about to take place. And the big news that we're all waiting on is who is going to start game 1 for the New York Mets. Once again, they're going Kodai Senga. I guess if it ain't broke, don't fix it. They went to Senga in game 1 of the NLDS. Here he is again, starting game 1. I'll tell you, if you listened to my show a couple days ago, I did not like the idea of Kodai Senga starting game 1. And this was based on the notion that Kodai Senga was not going to pitch on anything but 5 days rest. That's what he is comfortable doing, dating back to his time in Japan and what we saw him do a lot last year with the Mets. And because of the injuries this season, the Mets have been most comfortable trying to keep him on that type of a schedule. But there really has been no schedule at all to keep him to because he's only made 2 appearances all year, 2 starts. Of course, the one against the Braves where he was fully ramped up, ready to go after, a whole rehab slate in the minor leagues. And then, of course, against the Phillies where it was 2 innings. So now it's a little bit different for Kodai Senga, and that's why the Mets made this decision. The reason why I was nervous about it is because if Senga was going to go on that 5 days rest, he would not be available for game 5. Manaea, if he pitched game 2, he also would not be available for game 5 unless it was on 3 days rest. So I didn't like the idea of putting Manaea in a bad position. I feel like Manaea has proven himself as the ace of this team, and I would have just gone with Manaea. If it was my decision, I still probably would have. With that said, I do think that going Senga to Manaea sets up a really interesting advantage for the Mets in game 2 and game 6, and we'll get to that. And then in game 1, you have Kodai Senga, and according to Carlos Mendoza and Kodai Senga, it sounds like the plan is for him to start game 5 as well. So he's going to go on regular rest, which eases a lot of my concerns about this. Now it's just a matter of seeing what he looks like in this game 1. Expect him to go 3 innings, maybe 4 if he has a really tidy pitch count. I can't see him going anything over 60 pitches. The expectation based on what he's done is probably more something in the 45 to 50 pitch range. The way I would look at Kodai Senga for this game is he's going to go through the Dodgers lineup once. Depending on how he looks against the top of the Dodgers lineup, maybe you see him go through Ohtani and Betts, potentially Freeman, although maybe you'd want David Peterson to come in against Freeman. And in general, maybe it is David Peterson to face Ohtani as well, left on left. So we'll see how the Mets play it. But basically, game 1, it's going to be a Senga-Peterson piggyback situation. All goes well. Game 5, Kodai Senga could be stretched out even more. Maybe it is Peterson again, but I think the hope would be David Peterson could still be available out of the bullpen for some more games this series. So I wouldn't expect them to run Peterson into the ground in this outing tonight. I think maybe 3 innings. And that way you preserve him to potentially go in game 3 if you really need him, or a game 4. Again, it's all just dependent on the flow of this series. If the Mets have a chance to win a game, they're going to want David Peterson to pitch and leverage because they just don't have a ton of bullpen arms that they can trust. So for game 1, expect it to be Senga, Peterson, just like it was against the Phillies. Hopefully that gets you through the first 6 innings. And then the final 3, you're going to turn it over to the bullpen most likely, where who knows who's going to come out of it. But the guys you trust the most right now, if you have a lead, clearly it is Ryan Stanek, Reed Garrett, and then your closer, Edwin Diaz. Now let's talk about the rest of this series, because here's where the matchups get really interesting. And I should have mentioned Kodai Senga going up against Jack Flaherty. So this is an advantage Dodgers. You would think Flaherty had a 2.95 ERA with the Tigers this year, got traded at the deadline to the Dodgers, had a 3.58 ERA. He did give up 4 runs in his one postseason start, pitched into the 6th inning. He is their best option in this series. So that's going to be an interesting matchup to see him go up against Senga, because Flaherty is the one starter that you probably trust for the Dodgers to give them some length for a bullpen that's going to need it, because they're going to be asked to cover a lot of ground throughout this series. So we'll see how far they push, and we'll see if the Mets can get to Flaherty. That's going to be fun. We'll sort of talk about that a little bit as well as we get into the next segment on the position players. So I kind of talk about matchups against Flaherty. Now here's where I think the Mets have a big edge, and it's game 2 and game 6. Sean Manaea will be going in those games. And on the other side, while it has not been announced, the expectation is Walker Buehler would go, as he's the only other fully stretched out starter that's going to go twice this series. Yoshinobu Yamamoto is going to stick to 5 days rest. That's what Dave Roberts basically announced. So Yamamoto would not be available until game 4, and that would basically be his only potential start in this series. Dave Roberts said as much. Expectation, we only see Yoshinobu Yamamoto once. So with that said, you might see Buehler twice, and Sean Manaea should have a huge pitching advantage against Walker Buehler. I also wanted to just give you a quick note. Pay attention to Walker Buehler. He fits the mold of what Luis Severino was this year, and I could absolutely see the Mets target Walker Buehler in free agency if he does leave the Dodgers as a reclamation project. It's been a rough year for Buehler. Overall, 5.38 ERA. He has gotten his velocity back for the most part, but it's come and gone this year. He's been up and down, I think, a couple times, just sort of managing, coming off Tommy John, getting him right, all those things. He did give up 6 runs against the Padres in the NLDS. Although I think if you watch that game, he fought through a lot. There wasn't some great defense play behind him, no errors, but plays that could have been made that could have gotten him through that outing a little bit cleaner, but he did not have a strikeout. So again, 2 and 6, I think, are a big edge for the Mets in those games. Game 3 is going to be Luis Severino, and for the Dodgers, probably a bullpen game. Severino would then be able to turn around and pitch at game 7. Jose Quintana, the one thing I don't like about how this lines up, you're only going to see him in a game 4 at this point, maybe out of the bullpen on 3 days rest. He has been your best pitcher in the playoffs. He's been nails, but maybe the Mets are looking at Quintana as a guy that needs to get hitters to expand the zone, and you have a really disciplined veteran Dodgers team where maybe Quintana stuff isn't going to play as well. I like Quintana getting his one start at Citi Field. I think that is a good advantage for the Mets. I don't know how much I love Quintana pitching in Chavez Ravine, so I think that's an interesting side of it, but he'll be going up against Yoshinobu Yamamoto. So if you're just kind of going, who's got the advantage each game, I would say the Dodgers probably had advantage game 4, maybe a slight advantage game 1 and game 5, because the Mets are going with Senga, and that is a wild card. I think the Mets have advantages in games 2 and 6, and then the Severino versus bullpen game is a crazy, crazy thing to discuss. And I think that's really the key of this series, the biggest thing to watch out for. These are 2 teams that pitch completely differently, that have gotten here in completely different ways, okay? You look at what the Mets have done this year, and we talked about this as it related to the Phillies and the fact that those were 2 teams that were very similar, where they were built off of the strength of their starting pitching. The Mets this year were top 5 in innings pitched from their starters all year. And since August, they were number 1 in Major League Baseball. No staff got more innings from their starting pitchers since August than the New York Mets. The Dodgers, on the other hand, they were bottom 3 in starters innings since August. Tyler Glasnow got hurt. That was a guy that was giving them a lot of innings earlier in the season. So they really have been just ravaged by injuries to their rotation. On the year, they had the 6th lowest amount of innings pitched by their starters. The bullpen, obviously, just flipped that. Their bullpen has been used a ton. And the bullpen really won them that series against the Padres. Pivotal game 4, back against the wall. Are they going to go to Jack Flaherty on short rest or Yamamoto? They decide instead to go bullpen game. They shut out the Padres. That momentum carried over into game 5. Yoshinobu Yamamoto did pitch that game, but he was at less than 70 pitches through 5 and then went right back to that bullpen to close the door because that's how much faith Dave Roberts has in his bullpen, and rightfully so. Unlike the Mets, where you're saying, all right, you sort of trust Edwin Diaz, but also sometimes you don't. And then it's kind of the same conversation with Ryan Stanek and Reed Garrett. There's not a lot of guys you have complete faith in, if really anyone. At this point, it almost feels like David Peterson's the guy you feel the best about when he comes out of the pen, and he's a starting pitcher. For the Dodgers in the NLDS, Michael Kopech, 3 1/3 scoreless. Anthony Banda, former Met, by the way, 2021, I believe, 3 scoreless. Evan Phillips didn't give up a hit in 4 1/3. Blake Trinan, 3 2/3 scoreless. Alex Vesia had 3 scoreless innings pitched, but it seems like he might be out for this series. Daniel Hudson, 2 1/3 scoreless. So you count them up, even without Vesia, that is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 guys that they trust in that bullpen. And it's clearly their biggest strength on the pitching front. So that's really going to be the thing to follow in this series. If the Mets starters can keep that Dodgers lineup at bay, and if the Mets bats can continue to hit against bullpens, because that's been their real strength throughout the season, but particularly in the playoffs, getting on the Phillies bullpen. Before that, the huge comeback against Devin Williams. Before that, against the Braves, the comeback against the Braves bullpen once they got Schwellenbach out of the game. And then, of course, Lindor hitting the home run against Raisel Iglesias. If the Mets can continue to hit relievers and their starting pitchers can keep the Dodgers at bay, they will win this series. But the Dodgers have a really tough lineup full of superstars. We're going to talk about the position player side of this thing in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So maybe tonight you're looking at Pete Alonso, who is 2 for 3 in his career against Jack Flaherty, limited sample size, but maybe sees him well. You think Pete Alonso is going to hit a home run? You sign up for FanDuel. You throw $5 on a home run prop for Pete Alonso, and you're going to win no matter what because you're going to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose. Head over to FanDuel to get started. That is FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 11,000 subscribers by the end of the season. I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's start things off when it comes to the position players with the Mets side of things. Jeff McNeil played his second game with the Arizona Fall League, played the entire game out in right field, went 1 for 5, hit into a couple double plays, but no strikeouts. He's good to go. He's healthy. He's going to be on this roster unless something crazy happens. So now the decision is, who do you leave off of the roster? We talked about this in the third segment of yesterday's show, why the Mets might keep Acuna and Jeff McNeil. But I caught on to something that Carlos Mendoza said today when asked about the decisions the Mets might have to make. Do you carry an extra bat? Do you carry that extra arm? What do you do? And as he was sort of running through the options, one of the things that he said, and I don't know if anyone's really caught this, he said, trying to decide with all the Dodgers right-handed relievers if you need an extra left-handed bat. That comment struck me because I don't think he's talking about Jeff McNeil being the extra left-handed bat. I don't think there's any discussion. If Jeff McNeil is healthy, he's on this roster. I think that's pretty clear with everything the Mets have said, and just the fact that Jeff McNeil is the type of player that could be a real impact guy. He's got way more MLB experience than Luis Angel Acuna, even more MLB experience when it comes to quality play throughout his career. Obviously, you can mince throughout his season this year, or even look back to last year. But there's that baseline of Jeff McNeil when he's going that's better than some of the guys on your roster that are maybe having better individual seasons, like a Jose Iglesias, like a Jesse Winker, Tyrone Taylor, Harrison Bader, whatever it is. So you're talking about a former batting champion, two-time All-Star. If he's healthy, he's going to be on the roster. So I don't think that's a discussion. So if he's saying that there's a discussion behind the scenes about carrying a left-handed bat, it just piqued my interest. Like, who's the extra left-handed bat? Is there a world when not only does Jeff McNeil join this roster in the NLCS, could the Mets view the matchups and think, we're not going to have much use for Luis Angel Acuna when it comes to hitting in these games because of these tough right-handed relievers? Maybe we want Brett Baty. I don't think they're going to go that route. If I had to guess, it's either McNeil and Acuna or just McNeil, and they keep the extra arms to get through a long series. But I also would not be surprised if it's Brett Baty, because it was an interesting little comment, one of those throwaway things. Obviously, there's a ton of conversations going on behind the scenes. And if that's one of them, the idea of getting an extra left-handed bat, I believe that bat would be Brett Baty. So we'll see. I doubt DJ Stewart's going to parachute in here, though. Don't expect that. So we'll see what the Mets do there. Regardless, when you look at this series, the Mets have, in my opinion, the deeper team. I think they have the more ignitable bottom of their lineup. When you have a guy like Francisco Alvarez who could have a big playoff moment still, I'm waiting on that. When you have Starling Marte hitting somewhere potentially between 6 and 9, having Jesse Winker where he might bat 5th, he might bat 6th, you don't really know, but just the amount of guys the Mets can play matchups with, I think that does play to their advantage here. And speaking of matchups, what do you do against Jack Flaherty? I looked at the numbers across their respective careers. Not a lot of guys have seen Jack Flaherty. Flaherty, of course, spent most of his career with the Cardinals, got hurt, so he was out for a little bit. Then it was last year from Cardinals to Baltimore. Didn't have a lot of successes with the Orioles, signed with the Tigers, and had a great season. And then now with the Dodgers, you look at the Mets lineup, only 2 guys have more than 5 career at-bats against Jack Flaherty. That's Starling Marte. He used to play in the NL Central with the Pirates. And that's Jesse Winker. He used to play in the NL Central with the Reds. Marte, 4 for 22 in his career, 182 average, 7 strikeouts. I think he might be on the bench for this game because of that. We'll see. Jesse Winker, 8 for 21, 381 average, 458 on base, 810 slug, 3 doubles, 2 homers. He's going to be in there. Now, the other guys, Jose Iglesias is 0 for 5 in his career. No one else had more than 4 at-bats against him. I don't know if they hold that 0 for 5 against Iglesias, but I actually think Jeff McNeil is going to be in the starting lineup as a left-on-right matchup here. So if he is, where does he play? Francisco Lindor, Mark Vientos, Brandon Nimmo, Pete Alonso. Write those names in pen. That's 1 through 4 of the rest of this series, in my opinion. Francisco Alvarez is going to play every game, I think, whether he bats 8th or 9th to be determined, but I think he's going to be in there. The 4 guys in the middle, I don't know what they're going to do. I would imagine that it's going to be either Harrison Bader or Tyrone Taylor in center field for most of these games, unless the Mets eventually decide they need offense and they want to start Nimmo in center. I just don't think they're going to go to that card in game 1. Tyrone Taylor is the obvious answer to be the starting center fielder, but Harrison Bader played behind Jack Flaherty quite literally in center field for the Cardinals for years. So do they believe that Bader might be able to see Flaherty well? I don't know. If he's in the starting lineup, I think that's why. Now, right field, who's going to start there? You could just say, hey, Starling Marte is our guy. And I wouldn't be mad at that because Starling Marte has had a very good postseason overall when you look at the big hits he's had. But also you look at his average and the fact that he hasn't done anything but hit singles. I don't know if you have to force him into the lineup against a guy he really struggled against in his career. So you could just start Jesse Winker and right. That would allow you to put JD Martinez at DH. And then if you're going to get Jeff McNeil in the lineup, it might be at second base instead of Jose Iglesias. So if I had to guess, I think that might be the route the Mets go. If they want to keep Iglesias in there, I could see them putting Jeff McNeil in right and DHing Jesse Winker. I think Winker is going to be in this game. I think McNeil is going to be in this game. What I don't know if Marte or JD Martinez is going to be in this game or if Jose Iglesias is going to be in this game. That's what I'm not sure about. Now, looking more at the series broadly and you're focusing on the Dodgers hitters, Teoscar Hernandez is the guy that nobody talks about. And he is the real X factor for this Dodgers team because he drove in 7 runs in the NLCS. Everyone's worried about the top 3, right? Ohtani, Betts, Freeman. But Teoscar Hernandez batting cleanup is a pretty good weapon they have. They also have experienced veterans like Will Smith, Max Muncy, Kike Hernandez. Have seen a lot of playoff games. Gavin Lux had a pretty decent NLDS. So they got a fairly deep team still. The big kind of question mark is Freddie Freeman because he's playing through a bad ankle. How is he going to look? He really can't run. Still, he went 4 for 14 in the last series, and it's Freddie Freeman against the Mets. So I'm sure all of us are going to be really nervous anytime he stepped into the box. Now, the big gun, the guy everyone wants to talk about, the one that Major League Baseball wants us to talk about, Shohei Ohtani. It was not Ohtani that came through for the Dodgers to get them to advance. Teoscar Hernandez, it was Kike Hernandez in that last game hitting a home run against Yu Darvish. And Mookie Betts had a couple home runs at the end of that series. Mookie Betts started turning on. Mookie Betts has a lot of playoff experience, had a lot of deep runs with the Red Sox, World Series champion. Shohei Ohtani, this is his first go-around, and in the NLDS, Major League Baseball doesn't want us to know this. There was a weird phenomenon going on today. Everyone on Twitter was like, man, it's weird. You click on every single Dodger if you're on your phone, and the first thing that comes up is their postseason stats on MLB.com. For Ohtani, it's regular season. Why is that? Could be nothing, could be something. That's conspiracy theory stuff that we don't have to get into. But what isn't conspiracy is in 20 at-bats in the NLDS, Shohei Ohtani struck out 10 times. What does that mean? Is he going to stay down for long? You can't count on it. What's the Ohtani effect going to be in this series? We're going to talk about storylines in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And Game Time Picks makes it easier to get tickets for your favorite live events because they'll filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. They're right there for you at Game Time. The best part about Game Time, they sell tickets not just up to the start time of the game, but an hour after. So if you're in the New York area or if you're in LA and you're trying to get to these games, but you're a little bit nervous about those prices, maybe you wait until after the game starts. I hope you have a good contingency plan if the prices are just too much for you. But with Game Time, you might be able to get in at a fraction of the cost after the game starts. If you want to buy your tickets on Game Time, download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. If you're an everyday listener of the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. And you have the lineup graphics sent to your phone each day so you know the starting lineup without ever having to go on social media. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, let's talk about narratives in this series. And the biggest one is going to be for Major League Baseball, Shohei Ohtani. Win, lose, or draw, Shohei Ohtani is going to be the headline because it's Shohei Ohtani. He is the face of Major League Baseball right now, two-way player. No one's ever done it since Ruth, and Ruth didn't really do it the way Ohtani has as far as actually being committed to doing both this way. 50-50 season when he's not pitching, MVP this year. I mean, the stories are endless, and you don't even have to look far to see Shohei Ohtani when you're watching any baseball game. I don't know about you guys, but I watch a lot of my games on MLB.TV during the regular season, and I'm using my computer or my phone, whatever it is. What's the number one ad you see if you're watching from there? Hey, 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 what you got to say? That Shohei Ohtani New Balance commercial, it is on a loop. So they're going to push Ohtani to the forefront. So that's obviously an element to this series, and I think if you're trying to find the counter to that for the Mets and what Major League Baseball is going to be pushing here, it's Ohtani versus Lindor. And we did a lot of talk about that on this show in August. And I wholeheartedly believe that Francisco Lindor has been more valuable to the New York Mets this year. And I'm not saying he should win the award. Ohtani won the award in September. It's locked up. There's no way between Lindor's back injury and then Ohtani putting up the crazy numbers that he did. He won the MVP. I'm not going to argue that again. But in spirit of most valuable, I still believe Francisco Lindor is the most valuable player in Major League Baseball because leadership matters, defense matters, posting up every day matters. This guy was everything to the New York Mets, and I believe more than any player in baseball, outside of maybe Bobby Witt Jr., there's not another player you could pull from their roster that would have a bigger impact on the team than Lindor. You pull Ohtani out of this roster, I still think they would have made the playoffs. And he didn't do much in the NLDS, so they might still be where they're at right now, even without Ohtani. The Mets, they're not here without Lindor. So I've made that argument, and in August, there was a statistical argument for Lindor based on WAR, based on a lot of things. Now, Ohtani leaped ahead of him in the end, and if you go back to some of those episodes or the articles I wrote, I sort of said, hey, Lindor's got to win it in September, and he didn't do it. But if you look at WAR since June, Lindor was the best player in the National League by a slight margin, despite the fact that Ohtani hit I think it might have been 40 home runs since June, which is insane. So that's going to be something that's talked about, though, that whole Lindor Ohtani thing, most valuable versus most outstanding, however you want to look at it. That's going to be something that's going to be talked about. Now, the other thing to just mention is playoff history. Fox, ESPN, I think Fox probably has almost all of these games. I didn't check the full TV schedule. I think they have the first three at least. They're going to be playing highlights from the past. And these teams have met 3 times in the playoffs. The older Locked On Mets fan here that's listening today, and I think that's probably a larger portion of the audience that does go back to the 80s, the 1986 Mets, those who are my dad's age or even a little bit younger, you remember the 1988 season more than I do, certainly, because I was just a twinkle in my dad's eye at the time. But that series ended 7 games, NLCS. Probably the Mets, best other chance to win a World Series with that 80s team, obviously. And they lost in a Game 7 where Oral Hershiser pitched a complete game shutout. So that was the first time these teams met in October. And you go back, that was the last time the Dodgers won a World Series in a full season. They obviously won the 2020 COVID World Series. Some people want to throw an asterisk on that. I don't know if that's necessarily fair to the Dodgers, but at the same time, it's always going to be mentioned, and that's why it's an asterisk. There's Dodgers fans tuning into my show today. You can get mad at me for that. I encourage you to comment your disdain for me mentioning it, but everyone's going to till the end of time, probably until the Dodgers win another one. So the fact that in a full season, the Dodgers haven't won since 88, the Mets haven't won since 86, that's kind of a cool storyline to talk about a little bit. And then these teams met in 2006 and 2015, the 2 best seasons of my lifetime until this year. 2006, the Mets swept the Dodgers in the NLDS. 2015, there was that epic series between the Mets and Dodgers. You had so many good pitching matchups. Kershaw and Greinke going multiple times. DeGrom, having the Game 1 win, the Game 5 win. There was the Chase Utley slide with Ruben Tejada. I mean, there's so much you can go back to with that series. So to see these teams meet up again almost 10 years later, that's pretty cool. And yeah, we'll sort of see how much that's talked about. I'm sure it's going to be mentioned. Like, they're going to show the highlight at some point during these games of Utley going to Tejada. And if they don't, they're making a mistake, because it sort of fuels a rivalry that really doesn't exist between these two teams. It's East versus West. They don't play each other much. There's not really much there, but you have to try to build up these stories when you're watching these games. So those are the 3 meetups that they might talk about. But 06, I don't think they're going to really mention. The Mets, if they won the World Series, maybe they got to the World Series even. But you talk about the 06 Mets, you really just think about the NLCS, unfortunately. So it's going to be a lot of talk about 1988, one of the best Mets teams ever that didn't get there because the Dodgers won it all. And then 2015, the last time these two teams squared off. The last narrative we talked about at length on yesterday's show, that's the whole full circle narrative about the Mets, where they were, remember, end of May, they got swept by the Dodgers, and they had the players only meeting. Everything since then has been a rocket ship for the New York Mets. If you want to go back even further than that, the bad run that led to the players only meeting started with losing the final game in LA to the Dodgers. They lost Francisco Alvarez in that series. The Mets went 10-25 across a 35-game span from their last, really a 35-game span that included 4 losses to the Dodgers, the one in the final game of their series in LA, and then the 3 in New York. So you have that as well to talk about a little bit. This is the chance for the Mets to prove that they are the better team, that they have completely redefined who they are. And look, when they were still in their genesis in April, the early part of their season, they did beat the Dodgers in LA when they were riding that hot streak of going 12-3 after the 0-5 start. So I think there is a lot of elements you can pull on here, but ultimately it's just great baseball, right? 7 games, 2 really good teams. And I like that it's teams that are different, right? Mets, Phillies, it felt like you were looking at yourself in the mirror in a lot of ways, just when it comes to the fact that the starting pitchers were similar as the strength of the team on the pitching front. The fact that the top of the lineup for each of those teams were really deciding the series. The top 4 for the Mets, top 4 for the Phillies. And then you also have the fact that it's 2 Northeast fan bases that are rabid, who have gone through a lot of tough losses, who really relish getting a chance to see playoff baseball. And just a lot of similarities. This is completely different. It's East versus West. It's great starters versus great relievers. It's the underdog Mets based on, narratives going into the season. But you look at where these teams have been over the last 4 or 5 months, and the Mets have been better. So there's that element. Best on paper, best in actuality over the past 100 games. So which is going to win out? We're going to see game 1, how this series kicks off. Obviously, game 1s are vitally important. The Mets have a mission here. It's take 1 game in LA. They got a good shot in game 2 with Sean Manaea going up against Walker Buehler. But if you steal game 1 and then you can go with Sean Manaea, all of a sudden you could be sitting pretty by the time this series gets to Citi Field. It all starts tonight. What will Kodai Senga do? How will this lineup respond to a couple days rest after just riding momentum like crazy across their 10 days of just Braves, Brewers, Phillies, just rapid fire, just going through these games? They had a little bit of a rest. Now let's see how they respond to that, shake off the minimal rust, and try to get an edge in this series. I'll be breaking down all of it. We're going to do a post-game and a pre-game, essentially, just like I've been doing throughout the playoffs. So expect me to go live on YouTube after this game tonight, and then I'll follow up with another show that'll kind of lead you into all the things to watch for in game 2 on Monday. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and also put the notifications on so you get that notification when I go live. If you're listening and you want to be part of the live reaction to these games, find the channel on YouTube, do those things, subscribe, hit the notification bell, like the video, comment, all that good stuff. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel. Covers everything in the world of sports. Talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. My Locked On Sports Today is streaming 24/7 on YouTube.